The Last of Us Left Behind, brought to you by the Sony Walkman, available in your nearest department store in 1987. Hello everyone, Deep here with another review on another piece of DLC, but it's a much more recent one. As you guys may know, I am a huge fan of The Last of Us. From the very beginning, I thought to myself, I'm going to be a loyal follower of The Last of Us, meaning I'm going to purchase the game day one, which I did. I bought the Survival Edition, or Survival Instinct Edition, whatever it was called, that comes with the bonus artwork book and the steel case and all this bonus stuff. And I also said to myself, if there's any DLC that comes up for the game within the preceding year, I will purchase it. With the exception of the multiplayer DLC, because honestly, when it comes to any game, including The Last of Us, I really don't care for multiplayer DLC. I just play the multiplayer as it is. I don't feel the need to purchase, those boosters and extra weapons and different kinds of costumes, that kind of stuff. I don't care for that. But what I do care for is bonus story DLC. Whenever it comes to story DLC for any game, especially The Last of Us, I am there. So here I am to talk about The Last of Us Left Behind, the first and only story DLC that's going to be released for The Last of Us by Naughty Dog. And Left Behind takes place prior to the events of The Last of Us and gives us some more backstory on Ellie, one of the main characters of the original game. Now, being that it's a DLC expansion, you should come to expect things from the original game being carried on over to here, such as the graphics and the gameplay. They're pretty much the same, only with a few minor tweaks, some definite improvements. Now, granted, it might just be because I haven't played The Last of Us in a while, but I did feel like some of the cutscenes looked better than they have before. I still stick with what I said about the graphics in the original game, where I said that it's probably the closest thing you're going to come to next gen on a current gen console. And there were some things that I just hadn't noticed before. Like, for example, there's a part where Ellie gets wet. She submerges herself into water. I can't remember exactly, or maybe she's just sweating from all the running. And her skin was actually glistening. And that brought me back to the new definitive edition of Tomb Raider that just recently came out. And I just thought that the graphics here were great, possibly even better than the original game. But like I said, it's probably because I just haven't played the original game in some time. And the same thing goes for the gameplay, the crafting system, the survival horror elements of running out of bullets and not knowing how to take out the enemies, whether they be clickers, which are still scary with their clicking and their twitching, that still freak me out, and hunters, the people, the living, that you have to probably fear most overall, because clickers, you can take them out from behind and you got a sustainable knife. Ellie comes with her knife and her bow, just like she did in the original game where you got to play as her for a brief amount of time. But it's always easier to take out clickers, whereas the living, which we've come to fear more than the actual infected, they have guns. They have these powerful guns, and what gave this piece of DLC a larger edge than the original game is because in the original game, for 90% of the time, you would play as Joel, who is obviously an adult. Without trying to get a little sexist here, he is a man, so obviously he is just a little bit physically stronger, even though a woman could be as strong as a man. I'm not saying that she couldn't be, but I'm just saying within the context of these two characters, he's stronger. So being an adult male and being someone who has lived in this world for 20 years, that sense of peril was still there, but it's not as big as it is here in this DLC, because from beginning to end, you are playing as Ellie, this young girl who has been in this world for only a short amount of time and not as much time as Joel, and that made things much more intense when you have to get around and figure out a way to either go around clickers or manifest something in order to distract them. There's several moments in this game where it literally made me think as to how should I approach this. Should I go ahead and just take the clickers head on, avoid them, or what in my opinion has got to be the best 2 or 3 moments of the game, use the clickers to kind of get them fighting with the living hunters and kind of have them take out one another while I sneak behind them. I thought that was very ingenious for the game to design that. The only possible improvement in the gameplay that I noticed would have to be some of the melee combat that Ellie has. Whenever she would pull out her knife and stab a guy, it felt a lot more smoother and much more natural and downright realistic. Like I said before already a couple of times, it might just be because I haven't played The Last of Us in a while, and maybe that was still present in the original game, but here there was just moments of fluidity in terms of the movement of the characters that just felt real. Now granted, the DLC is of course nowhere near as long as the original game, so you don't feel that sense of exhaustion, of managing to survive this particular moment in the game, and you take a breather, that sigh of relief, like, oh, I made it. Here, it's only about 3.5 hours, so you don't get that feel, but it's nice to see that they didn't abandon any sort of mechanic when it comes to the gameplay. And before I forget, to top the gameplay off, there are certain mechanics that get introduced here, especially for this DLC. You're not going to find it anywhere else. And the reason why these unconventional mechanics are in here is a bit of a surprise, so I'm not going to reveal why these mechanics are here and what those mechanics are in general, but let's just say that you're playing as Ellie, so expect to do certain things that you would have never expected to do, but because you're playing as Ellie, they make sense. But the main attraction of Left Behind would have to be the story. I already knew going into it that this was going to take place prior to the events of The Last of Us, and tell the story of Ellie and her friend Riley, the friend that she would kind of mention in passing in the original game, especially towards the end of the game. However, what I did not expect was that this is actually intertwined with certain events that are actually happening within the story, or at least the story continuity of the original game. I don't want to get into too much detail, but because I do feel like you need to go into this DLC as fresh as possible, especially if you have already played The Last of Us and you haven't played it yet, then what are you watching this video for? But I definitely wasn't expecting that. Now, the only nitpick that I have with that is that one of those stories, which is the one that is taking place in quote-unquote present time within the actual narrative of the original game, is that it kind of feels a little hollow, like they're showing us things that we could have easily put together in our mind and just theorized when we had finished the original game. So for a brief moment, I was thinking to myself, like, why am I playing this? I mean, it's intense and I like playing as Ellie again, but story-wise, I'm not seeing any sort of kind of progression here. It isn't until the very end that that particular story ties thematically with the flashback, what Ellie did when she was with Riley prior to meeting Joel in the original game. And that is where the story is at its strongest point, showing Ellie and her friendship with Riley, which I think really delivered a nice sense of, I'm going to use a very fancy word here, pathos, however you prefer to pronounce it, but a really good sense of emotion of how this girl is trying so hard to hold on to that innocence of being a teenager, to the point where they go to a mall and they're riding on a carousel and they're taking photos and they're just having a blast. And deep down inside, you know that this is just not going to either end well, or this is all for naught, because you know that the world has become such a harsh place, which you've come to expect from an apocalypse. I mean, look at The Walking Dead. For the most part, the story was great. It gave us some good details about Ellie that we have never known, and they were very interesting. And her friendship with Riley felt very authentic. There was that genuine sense of camaraderie, and at the same time, that innocence of being a child. Especially when they're going through a Halloween store, and there were plenty of moments of not only immersion, just like in the original game, but also just flat out great writing. Things that you would expect Ellie to say that are both funny and emotional. And for the most part, like I said, the story was great, but I didn't think that it hit me on an emotional level that I have never been hit before. Until the ending. Towards the end of this story, something happens. And this thing, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil what it is, but this thing is going to split players down the middle. And people are either going to love it or they're going to hate it. And I know it's a bit of an extreme, and who knows, maybe some people will simply just like it and accept it, or some people will not like it and would have preferred it to have gone another way. But this thing that happens, mark my words, is going to be one of the most controversial things to happen to The Last of Us, and probably one of the most talked about things in the gaming world this year. Me? I loved it. I loved it because it hit that emotional level that I wanted. It hit me so hard that I was trying to fight back tears. I was trying my best to fight back tears, and man, this was just such... I'm still thinking about it. I played this game, I finished this like 2 or 3 days ago, and I'm still thinking about it. and I can't let it go. One of the reasons why it was so effective is because it was just completely unprecedented. I did not see this thing happening, and when it did, it really did make me wonder, how am I going to look at Ellie again when I do go back and replay The Last of Us for that New Game Plus, because I've been meaning to do so. I'm definitely going to look at Ellie differently, and I'm definitely going to pay attention to some of the things that she said, especially things concerning Riley. And oh man, it was just so emotional. It was like 3:30 in the morning, and I didn't go to bed until like 4:15 because I was still in my bed just thinking of that scene and thinking of how emotionally distraught I was from that scene. And what I also loved about that ending, the actual bit when it comes to Black, is that it could have ended in a rather depressing tone, but they went ahead and spared us from that and just let us put that together in our minds, and instead they showed us something that's a little bit more uplifting, something that conveys the message about cherishing the moments that you have with the people that you love, regardless of how much time that is. 2 days, 2 minutes, 2 hours, whatever. You cherish it and you fight for it, which is where it ties in thematically to the things that Ellie is doing in the present time within the narrative of The Last of Us game. I'm really hoping that I'm not going into too much detail, but I'm trying to save as many of the core details as possible. And I just love that emotional beat that scene struck with me. It's definitely something that just pushed the DLC to the next level for me. Besides my nitpick of what Ellie's going through in the present narrative of the original Last of Us game, my only other complaint would have to be that it's still a little steep to spend $15 on a 3.5 hour game. Now granted, this was actually more than I had anticipated. I remember reading some articles saying that this was only 2 hours long, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to spend $15 for 2 hours, like, it's gonna hurt, but it's The Last of Us, I gotta do it. Lo and behold, I was surprised to learn that this is actually about 3.5 hours. Now granted, I'm one of those people that likes to explore almost every nook and cranny to get as many supplies as possible, so maybe that might have taken a little bit of my time, but still, it took me about a good 3.5 hours. And I think that definitely redeemed its value quite a bit, but I still feel like it's just a tiny bit questionable to be charging us $15 for a 3.5 hour game. $9, perfect. $15, I don't feel ripped off, but like I said, I question it a little bit. Still, the price point is not going to take away the feels that it left me with, as well as the great gameplay, beautiful graphics, and just overall overwhelming way of telling a story, just like the original game did. I give Left Behind a 9 out of 10. It's a real shame that they're not going to make any more single-player DLC for The Last of Us, because I would have loved to have seen a similar kind of DLC only for Joel this time. But hey, who knows? Maybe that'll be saved for a potential sequel? Who knows? Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you guys thought of The Last of Us Left Behind DLC. And if you have played it, let me know if you guys want to hear a spoiler video from me, because right now I am tempted to make one. But at the same time, it is a DLC, and it is short enough for you to just go out, buy it, and play it, and experience it for yourself. But if you guys want to hear me talk about the spoilery stuff of the DLC, please let me know in the comment below, and I'll make one. I'll see you guys next time.